Welcome back, Jeff Cameron Show, 97.9 ESPN Radio. All right. I'm excited. Normally we do this earlier, man, but things got squirrely, and it's been a weird season, and anyhow. But I couldn't let this come and go, meaning this being Major League Baseball, the season come and go without at least having a great conversation with our good friend Matthew Leach, who is MajorLeagueBaseball.com editor, MLB.com editor, and, of course, Tallahassee's own. He's been a regular on the show off and on for a few years, but he goes actually way back, as he's been friends with my wife for a long, long time. Harvard guy, FSU guy, music guy in front of the program. Matthew Leach joins us now. Hello, good sir.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy. I'm excited. We were just talking off the air. Listen, man, we got what we wanted here as baseball guys, as people who want to see the two best teams. Look, somebody's going to be heartbroken. Somebody who's won 100 games is going to lose a World Series, but the matchup is right.
There is so much fun about this series. From the starting pitchers, I'm excited to see Kershaw. I'm really excited. I feel like people who follow baseball know without question who Jose Altuve is. I'm still not sure the country does, and I'm really excited for people to see what an incredibly fun player he is. I'm excited for Carlos Beltran finally to get to a World Series. And just the competition itself should be really tremendous. Good starting pitchers, really good lineups, good defense, mostly good bullpens, a couple managers who know what they're doing. It just should be a lot of fun. And the atmospheres are going to be amazing. I have been in postseason games in both of those ballparks. They are two of the greatest atmospheres I've been in. It's going to be loud and raucous and really cool.
Before we get to some specifics about this series, I do want to ask you about that. Let's go big picture here, Matthew. I love baseball. I care about the health of baseball. I talk baseball. I know it's not in non-markets and markets that doesn't really have a baseball team. You don't often hear it as much as you used to, but we try to sprinkle it in because Tom and myself both love baseball. The sport, some things we like about it, some things not so much. Give me big picture, Major League Baseball. It's been a great postseason. I think that's helped. But give me your overall thoughts about the three true outcome stuff and all that good stuff.
Well, I think there's a lot there. I am sort of naturally an optimist. I'm not going to lie. I'm a company man. So, my outlook is generally going to be on the optimistic side. And with that said, what I'm really excited about and what this postseason has shown is the ridiculous amount of young talent in the game right now.
Yeah.
Again, Altuve is not an old player. Aaron Judge is amazing. Corey Seager is amazing. The Indians' pitching staff is nearly, with except for Kluber, is nearly all younger guys, and Lindor is amazing. So there's this influx of young talent that are just not only good players, but just great guys to watch. And so I'm really excited about that. I mean, I think that we need more singles. I mean, that's just it really is that. I mean, we need more singles, more balls in play, more base hits, and I don't know how that happens or where that comes from, but it's still incredibly entertaining for me. I watch and I see the stars and I see the pitchers, and there are things that I don't like as much about the way the game is played. But overall, I'm an optimist. I'm excited. I see these incredible young stars on this big stage, and I say, how can you not like this?
What would you do, though? We always talk about tweaking the game. Those of us that are passionate about baseball and love it and want to see its best foot forward, what would you make? I mean, we're constantly discussing. It seems like the last couple of times I've had you on, we've had this discussion somewhat about bullpen changes, rules about when you can go get guys and when you couldn't. What would you do?
I think all of that stuff is really interesting, and I just think you have to really worry about unintended consequences. When you talk about fiddling with the rules that are really fundamental to the game, I think we've got to ask all those questions, and I think the commissioner's doing that, and I think that's part of what gives me some real optimism about going forward, is I do think that he's asking all these questions, and I think you have to ask about all of it. You have to ask about does a pitch clock have an impact on the batter-pitcher matchup? I think it may. I've heard people say that it does. So even stuff as simple as that, to, again, as you talk about, rules regarding reliever usage and number of batters or number of changes or number of visits, all that stuff, I think my answer is you got to ask all those questions, and I think they are. And so you've got the minors, and you've got the fall league, and you've got all these kinds of things where you can ask those questions, because I think that there are a lot of interesting ideas that we don't really know what their broader implications. So to me, I think the strike zone is a big part of it. I think a narrower, taller strike zone could, which is to say, the rule book strike zone, could have some of the impact we're looking for. But I think my answer is I don't really know, just because there are a whole lot of really interesting ideas that we just don't know how they work out in practice, because the balance in the game is so fine, and because the whole butterfly effect, I think, is very real in baseball. And when you start talking about messing with the mechanics of the game, I just don't think you know what happens. And so you have to ask the questions, but I don't think I can out and out say, do this, and this makes everything exactly what everybody wants it to be.
It's interesting. You brought up Aaron Judge, who's awesome, but he's also very much emblematic of what we're talking about, the problem, right? He set an MLB record for consecutive games with a strikeout. You saw unparalleled number of strikeouts, 19 times, and it was a nuts. You were sitting there watching that thinking, my God, all he does is, hit home runs as well and come up with clutch hits and do all those other things too that make him so exciting. But when he's not doing that, he is striking out, period. So it's a perfect image of what we're talking about with baseball. Exciting on the one hand, gotta have more balls put in play.
Yeah, but also, part of what makes him special is he's not Chris Carter or Chris Davis. He hit 285.
Right.
So, that's part of what makes this guy special, is he can hit the ball 9 miles, and he's got actually a really good strike zone. He's got an idea. He doesn't swing at bad pitches. He swings aggressively, but he also does get base hits. I think he is, part of what makes him exciting is he's a good hitter. A little like a peak McGuire, just in that, I think people forget that McGuire at his best was 300 hitter, and I think there's a little of that there, just strictly in terms of the kind of hitter he is.
We're talking to Matthew Leach, MLB.com editor. It's interesting too. I look, there's so many wonderful superstars in this series, and we're naming some of the guys in the postseason that draw people back to the game. And do you agree with folks that will try to make the argument that baseball needs a face? Baseball has to have a guy, whether that's Aaron Judge or, unfortunately for Mike Trout, he's obviously stuck with Anaheim. But or do you think now just the influx of broad, young talent will be enough to see the uptick in the way that people view baseball and cover baseball and talk about the sport?
I don't know, because I wonder if that question is sort of self-perpetuating, right? Like, I wonder if once we start asking that question, then the conversation becomes, who is it? And it kind of deflects a little bit from this combination of Trout and Harper and Seager and Correa and Lindor and Altuve and Scherzer and Strasburg and Kershaw. To me, it you can't say anything sells itself, because it's an entertainment market where there is a zillion different things to watch, and so the game does, and I think the game tries to and puts real effort into making sure everybody sees everything that's out there. I don't think there needs to be one guy that you hang it on. In part because baseball in a lot of ways is really, a lot of the interest is very regional. People follow their teams and love their teams, and you certainly have people who love the game, a lot of them, and bless those people. They are wonderful. They are important. They are me. But, a lot of it is also local. And so, to me, what makes the game strong is that breadth, is that in so many places you have somebody who's really exciting to watch. You even go places that didn't have great years. You look at Atlanta, there are exciting reasons to watch the Braves. Inciarte is a terrific player. Swanson is an exciting and rising player. Albies is incredibly exciting. Ronald Acuna is coming. There are nearly everywhere, there are exciting young players who are a reason to watch, and I think that's the best thing the game can have.
You mentioned him at the start of our conversation, Clayton Kershaw. You said you were happy for him. I think a lot of people are. He seems like a great guy. He's been a really good pitcher, and yet the knock on him has been about his postseason performances, and that's not always fair either. But he mentioned that he grew up a Dodger, got drafted by the Dodgers, didn't know a lot when he first got to the Dodgers about that great history. Now it's ingrained in him. He knows it, and that he's hoping a lot more people are talking about 2017 as opposed to 1988 after this year. But talk about why you were excited for Clayton Kershaw.
Well, it's all of that. And look, part of this bias, and I'll be sure. I certainly hope he's listening. My dad's a Dodger fan, so
gotcha.
I have followed the Dodgers more closely than a lot of teams for a long time. So part of it is just sort of following them and knowing what it means to him. He's a guy who is conscious of his place in that organization's legacy, his place in the game's history, I come to this partly from my perspective of having covered the Cardinals. And I remember when they won the World Series in '06, one of the first things Tony La Russa said was something along the lines of, I'm now really a part of the club. That, Gibson and Brock and Ozzie Smith and Willie McGee and these guys, I'm really a part of it now. And I got to think that for a guy like Kershaw, for a guy like Ethier, for some of these guys who have been around there a long time, to really feel a part of it, you have to have a ring. And the other part you also touched on is, I think a large chunk of his postseason reputation is really unfair. Mm-hmm. I have seen that guy pitch some brilliant games in October. He has had some games, a lot of it, I think maybe Joe Sheehan pointed this out, I'm sure other people have, that a lot of those games are 5 or 6 dominant innings, and then a guy on short rest with a team that didn't have any bullpen was asked to do too much and got in trouble at the end. If you look at his games, a lot of them are like that. This guy, I generally don't like those sort of he's soft narratives, but it's never been more unfair than it was with him. I have seen him in person pitch some ridiculous postseason games. That Game 5 save in Washington last year when he basically wasn't going to be denied the ball. There's a great piece about that, just about his essentially saying, no, I'm pitching. And they're saying, no, you're not. I say, yeah, I am. So that's a guy to me who has been treated unfairly to some extent and absolutely deserves to be in the position he's in now.
And as fans, we get to see that matchup with another great pitcher in Dallas Keuchel. This is, like we said, in so many ways, whether you're looking at the lineup or you're looking at the rotations, we get these kinds of matchups. This is what you dream of at the end of a long baseball season that we embrace. You want the two best teams. If you can get it, you got it. And this matchup is as good as they come.
Well, it's so hard to get to the end of the postseason and not only have two good teams, because two of the best teams, at least arguably the two best teams. The way that baseball works, you don't always get that. It's harder for the better team to win a series in baseball than in other sports. But also, I think part of what's really cool about this is that you had good LCSs. Even the 5-game NLCS was good, compelling ball. You went 7 in the ALCS, and yet, even after having those good series, both these teams were able to line up their rotations more or less the way you want. Mm-hmm, and so you don't come into this, the way you did in that division series. Again, I go back to that. I covered that. I was at that Nats-Cubs division series, and both of those teams, to some extent, came in not exactly set up the way they wanted to, and the Cubs had to work so hard, and that meant they weren't set up for the LCS. These teams are both set up, and they're healthy. Corey Seager is on the roster. They are basically at full strength. They have their pitching lined up, and for that reason, from Game 1, it should be we should be dropped right down in the middle of it in Game 1, whereas sometimes you kind of have that feeling out. Somebody's got to start their fourth starter and just hope to get through a couple of days before they can get their rotation back on. These teams are set up, and that adds to what makes this so compelling.
And some of the other guys that you maybe aren't talking about, well, certainly people aren't at a loss when you bring up the name Yasiel Puig to know who he is, but he's locked in and playing really well right now. You look at some of the names that maybe they don't jump off the page for people that are kind of casually tuning in, but you're seeing it now across the board with guys like Bregman and others. There are a lot of other names that you could point to that'll make the difference in this series. You got a guy?
I hadn't thought of it. I certainly think Puig is a guy to watch in that regard, just because he is such a wide swing guy. He can be shut down and he can be brilliant. But to me, it is one of the obvious guys, is one of the biggest questions. If Corey Seager, if this week and a half that Corey Seager has had off
to get healthy, yeah,
that means that his back is good, and if somehow it means that his elbow has finally stopped barking, and if this guy is at his best, he's one of the best players in the game. He was an MVP candidate last year. He was really hampered, not just recently, but all the way down the stretch. If he's right, it sets up their lineup in so many other ways. It means that they can use Chris Taylor in a different way rather than having to move him to the infield. And really, kind of so much of what they do on offense and defense comes down to Corey Seager being at the heart of it. So to me, it's kind of obvious to say that the guy who was an NL MVP candidate last year is the key, but I really think he's a big key. And if there's another one, I think it's the Astros getting from their rotation to Ken Giles. It's how they navigate that 6th, 7th, 8th. They've got some really good pitchers in there who have pitched poorly lately. And what's Hinch's confidence level in those guys? Is he willing to deploy them and say, I know he had a bad couple of weeks, but this is a good pitcher? Or does he try to get creative, use his starters, end up leaving questions for himself in games 3 and 4? That's the other thing I want to watch, is the 6th, 7th, 8th for the Astros.
I was reading something on MLB.com, and it was interesting to think about these two teams and how they were formed, and whether you're looking for homegrown guys or guys that they went out and got. You think about the Dodgers going out and getting Yu Darvish minutes before the non-waiver trade deadline, and the Astros bringing in Justin Verlander. And here we are in this conversation again. I mean, these teams, every year you wonder when these moments arise, do they pull the trigger? Do they make the move? Do they get the guy that's going to put them over the top? And it's hard to argue that those two teams didn't make huge, critical moves at just the right time that we now see paying off for them.
And what's really interesting to me is neither of those was really a slam dunk. I mean,
right.
Those are big names and guys who have been big-time star pitchers. But, Darvish was kind of pitching like a 3 this year. He was pitching like a 3 with upside, but he's kind of pitching like a 3 this year. And there's some notion that they found some kind of mechanical tweak. He's been superb recently. Verlander had started to get it together before the trade and was showing some really encouraging signs, but, for most of this year was not the guy he was a year ago, and was certainly not the guy he was when he was an MVP and Cy Young 4, 5, 6 years ago. The fact that both of those not only happened but worked out is pretty unusual. A lot of times those moves don't work out, regardless of what you give up. And the fact those guys have come in and just been anchors and really core parts of what these teams are doing is another interesting aspect to it.
Yeah, and there was the talk before it actually finally happened, before a move was made, that the Astros clubhouse was, pretty well pissed off that no moves were being made until a move was made.
Yeah, and it was a big one, and it was, as I understand it, literally a matter of seconds. Mm-hmm. Like, it was not 10 minutes before the deadline. It was seconds before the deadline that they got all that in to the commissioner's office.
We're talking with Matthew Leach, MLB.com editor. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you, normally we get a chance to talk about music. Maybe we'll do that after the World Series when we do a wrap-up. But I want to ask you this. If you were going to make a fix for Florida State, how about this? What's your number one concern about Florida State currently? Football.
It is that a defense that I saw in the first game and said, no matter what, that defense is good enough to win every game on the schedule, including going to Clemson. That defense I've seen for like 2 quarters since that game. And that's the thing that is most distressing. I understand the concerns on the offense and the concerns people have from outside. It's fair. It's legitimate. There are very real issues. But in the Alabama game, I saw a defense that if it played like that, this team should be 5-1 right now. Even with the issues, even with very real concerns, even with all the stuff that's got to get fixed. That defense plays like they played that game, this team's 5-1 right now. And they haven't. And it's really distressing for a team with that many NFL guys, that many legitimate star players, has just not played like they should play. That's in season. There's all the structural questions and all that, but that's the thing that just keeps driving me insane. That all those 5 stars and all those guys who are going to play on Sundays are, a good defense, but not the kind of defense that wins you games. And that's what I thought they'd be. And that's what we saw they could be for 6 quarters of this season.
Makes you angry, doesn't it?
A little bit.
Hey, brother, I always appreciate it, man. Great work out of you. And we'll talk again soon and enjoy the games.
Absolutely, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care. It's Matthew Leach, MLB.com. He's also been a columnist for them. He's the editor. And oddly has known, I joked about it at the outset, has known my wife since I think middle school, elementary school. And all these years later, one day, I come home and she goes, "Have you ever talked to a guy named Matthew Leach?" And I said, "No." And this is many years ago. And I go, "No, why?" She goes, "Well, he's doing something where he covers the Cardinals now. And I think he's about to move to New York City and do some stuff with MLB." She goes, "Oh, I went to school with him. I've known him forever. Super nice guy. We used to, hang out at youth group together and go to parties. And I've known him. You should reach out for him." I reach out. He's like, "Oh, I've been listening to you for years. I had no idea you were married to Christy." It's just a small world. That guy goes off to Harvard, leaves Tallahassee, and then gets a job that we would all dream of doing. He does an amazing job and a great, great guy.
Yeah, setting the content plan for, the crown jewel of the sport, which is, the World Series, and every big series that leads up to the World Series, he gets to call the shots on that. That's a pretty sweet gig.
Well, and have cool conversations with people that we respect throughout the industry and throughout Major League Baseball as well as other major sports. So it's cool, and it's because he's such a good guy and a hard worker and a knowledgeable guy and a guy that, as you hear, affable, fun to talk to. That's true. And I do know that we've wanted Game 5s and Game 7s, and we've wanted the best team to rise to the top and play like the best team, and we want all these things in baseball all the time. And so often the very aggravating thing about baseball is that it doesn't give it to you, that a team that is one of the best, if not the best team, has a bad series, and they're out of it. And a team that you saw was middling the vast majority of the year, snuck into the playoffs, and they go on a run. That's good and bad about baseball, but we got both the great teams to play great.
This is true, and I think the number one star of any MLB postseason, and this isn't me being the company man that he is paid to be, it's the atmospheres, it's the fans.
Well, Yankee Stadium was incredible.
Yeah.
And listen, and you'll see it with Dodger Stadium tonight, but listen, I've made it. I try to be honest on this show as best I can. I'm not a Yankee fan. Don't care about the Yankees. I get their place in history. I know what their history is as one of the great, if not the greatest franchises in all the world of sports. I got it. And I do love the lore. I've been to the new and the old Yankee Stadium, all that. I hated to have to admit that was the coolest atmosphere this postseason, just to watch that. It's a fever pitch. It is insane, and it was awesome to watch, and it added to, baseball's postseason.
But, I mean, look around baseball in the last 3 or 4 postseasons in your head. Go to every city that's been represented.
They've done a good job.
I mean, Toronto's borderline dangerous. It's so crazy.
In Chicago, of course, the desperation to break the curse and to watch those fans, and admittedly, I too am not a Cubs fan, but I was happy to watch them, to get that.
Cleveland's raucous. Houston's been great. LA's been great. Citi Field for the Mets was outstanding.
Oh, yeah.
Kansas City in the freezing cold World Series was awesome. I mean, that's the one thing. Again, I think it really translates, and it keeps you on the channel about 5 to 10 minutes longer until you get hooked in. If you tune into something where there's an atmosphere that's raucous, man, it just makes you want to see why. Why is everybody so excited?
Baseball is greater than that of other sports. It always has been because of the time between pitches.
The crowd shots. Yeah.
Well, and you have time to let it build and breathe. Not everything is now. You can let it build in your mind.
You see the guy wearing the jersey and the turtleneck next to the guy in the bullpen jacket, next to the lady who's head in her hands.
Always.
Next to the kid.
They do a good job with those shots, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. They got you. I love watching the kids, man. Parents bringing their kids out to these games until 11 at night. Kids, Well, he's hooked for life. That's your next generation fan. Mm-hmm. He'll never forget that moment, ever. He'll always be a baseball fan. And you get that in baseball's postseason big time. All right, we'll come back, wrap it up momentarily. Jeff Cameron Show, 97.9 ESPN Radio.